We've been joined by the country's Minister of Information and Civic Education, Leone. The Minister is here to talk about the implementation and importance of the National Records Management and Archives Policy and the National Media and Information Policy, which was launched, approved by Cabinet, among other government activities, over the weekend. Good morning, Mr. Minister. It's a pleasure always to have you.
Always a pleasure to be here. You both look fantastic, by the way. I was saying to Madam Swill that she's looking particularly radiant. It's great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister. So walk us through these two iconic, policies that have just been launched.
So I think it's important to situate this in the trajectory of progress that the country has been making. In 2020, after many years of promises, President Bio's government, at the time the sector was led by my predecessor. I want to start by giving him his flowers, Minister Mohammed Rahman Swari, and they achieved something extraordinary. They repealed the obnoxious criminal libel laws that were from the dark ages of our country. It's very important. We made a progress. But then that's the foundation that was laid. What we did last week in Cabinet was to build on that foundation so that we can now have a new building that takes us into the frontier of 21st century media policies. So UNESCO calls media policies critical for sustainability of democracies and open spaces. This is what UNESCO says. But Sierra Leone has never had a concise, articulated national media and information policy. So what did we do? We've worked for years, starting from Rado's days, with SLAG, MRCG. I want to give them all their flowers. All the members of the Fourth Estate, your institutions. And they led the process. It was not even led by government. It was led by SLAG and MRCG for years. And then they came to us with a draft and says, this is the outlook that we wish to see. We took that, we worked across the country again, did additional consultations, worked with external parties, and I dare say we have a first-rate, 21st century, forward-looking, comprehensive national media and information policy that helps us to build and achieve greater media freedom, that helps us to regulate the new media and think about what the outlook of new media should be, how we operate. It incorporates artificial intelligence. It institutionalizes inclusion. It creates, it is now consistent with the GWI bill that will ensure gender inclusivity. You will like that. But beyond that, it's about also language inclusivity. It now creates a framework for us to be able to promote our local languages. We've been having this conversation for a long time. I insist that for talk Kriyo and we should engage in our local languages. The media landscape did not have the means, the regulation to be able to do that. This new national media and information policy now incorporates all of that. It takes bloggers, for example. It spends time thinking about bloggers and how do they fit into the media landscape and what do we do? How do we create structures to regulate them? So that's policy number one. It's a new frontier for the media. Second one is just as important for similar reasons. Now, I think the World Bank says that national records and archives policies are a foundation for public sector reform. Take, for example, now, when I became a minister, I walked into the ministry, I'm handed a new email address. Everything that my predecessor, all the excellent work that he had done, I need to go scrambling, looking for it. Many people are given positions because the procedure for collecting, recording, managing, destroying public records in this country was simply non-existent. It was a fast system. For years, the laws we have, the last one was from 1960, and APC governments had to give them credit for this. In 2017, they sought to change that. They proposed a new law, but that law was overtaken by the results, and so the process was stalled. What we came in, what we've done, is to look systematically at the latest international standards. It's called ISO, and there's a number attached to it, and what you do for it will even guide private institutions like yourself. If you own public records, what are the practices that you should use? How do you protect that public record? How do you store that public record? How do you make sure that it is kept public memory, the truth, is kept for other people that come in your position, and how do you dispose of public record? It will affect not just private sector, public sector, different institutions. The standards are set. It establishes a new directorate of records and archives in the Ministry of Information and Civic Education that will be solely responsible for overseeing and creating the standards and regulations for how you do that. Now, somebody was asking the other day, it's like, oh, does that mean we have to hand your records over to me? Actually, no, it's the opposite. It means we set the standards, we set the regulations, you have the clarity, we do the training to operationalize this new records and archives law. And then finally, it creates a cadre of record officers. I'll tell you what used to happen, friends. If you were hired as a record officer in the civil service in Sierra Leone, some people were hired 25 years ago, they're still in the same level. They're still just records officers. Now, if they want to progress, they have to leave as record officers. What that means, it means you had a demotivated cadre of record officers. It means that they were just been there for so long. And some of them have been committed. Some people, you know, the old school civil servant, and they believe in their work. They say, I'm an archives officer. And by the way, public records and archives were divided. One was in the Ministry of Higher Education, the other one was kind of languishing in the wind. What we have done with this law is not just bring them together, we have created a strata, a cadre, that now means there's a predictable path that they can also go. It is fair, it is just, it helps us all, it helps us preserve national memory, it helps us keep truth, it helps create predictability. And I think those two policies, I want to thank President Bill, really, it's again a continuum of the kinds of things that we should have had for a long time, but we're almost starting from zero, and President Bill has had to fix and build so many things regarding our democracy. This is part of that.
Thanks to Google, we go there and try to get, you know, some bits of our history. But one of the things that I notice seem to be a challenge in Sierra Leone is how quickly we tend to erase, delete, or wipe out our history. There are things, even over recent times, you'll find arguments on social media, the first to become this. Whether it's in politics, even in entertainment, it's just there. We don't have those records. You ask some people today, who was the first Miss Sierra Leone in history? It's very difficult to get these things. In what way specifically does this policy help in solving some of these problems?
I think you just laid the perfect case for the Public Records and Archives law, policy, which, by the way, we're now going to make, we're now working on a law. So first it's the policy, and then we're going to now bring legislation forward. Cabinet has given us the approval to work with the AG's office to update the act, which is from the 1960s and needs to be updated, and for us to bring it so it can have the force of law. But it solves the problem that you're asking. There should be indisputable official public records and archives that you as a citizen can go into. And by the way, what this policy does, it says it's not just, we're not just talking about you know, records, that's paper records. We also include digital records, and that's why we have to work closely with the Ministry of Communication, Technology and Innovation, because they are responsible for data governance. So how do we make sure that the data governance infrastructure includes this? So if you want access to information, you know, when I go here, the record is this. In 2019, Migration will say, yes, Minister Chenoba on this day, now so it be. How that is going to happen is you need to have record officers. You need to have civil servants, public officers trained what to do. What are your obligations? It will be a crime in many countries to destroy public records, to mismanage public records, to mishandle public records, because it's important. It's not about you. It's, you know, without memory, you are nothing. We are an embodiment of the memories, right? Like our ancestors, at least the nation state is a creation based on memories, right? So what we have lacked here, and you know, I studied peace, they say, if you forget your past, you will repeat the mistakes of the past. And that's been part of the problem in this country. It's the lack of intentionality in thinking about memory, in thinking about our history, in thinking about our records. And I think President Bill is now ready to say that should be a thing of the past. We need to have history. By the way, as you know, he's also appointed a presidential librarian, the first in the history. So this tells you from day one, he has an instinct into what we can do about these kinds of things.
We had people who were, reading library studies at University of Sierra
Correct.
Leone, and they were oftentimes laughed at. That
Yes.
in this generation, you're studying library studies. This seems to be job opportunities
Massive.
heading their way.
It's great. In fact, I should also state that to work on this policy, we worked with the Frabe College Department of Records and Archives. One of their professors was one of the consultants that worked with us. In all the consultations that we did, we invited them. It's a critical piece. You're right. We all used to kind of look down at them and was like, how did they go study records, library? So now librarian, because you assume to study, library studies as it's defined at Frabe College, but it's library and information studies. Information is the lifeblood of every democracy. It's the foundation. You're right. What you just said for me is critical. What happened in 1981? Who knows? Every time I'm in conversations with people, I like to remind them, I was like, sorry, no, that's not the first time that has happened. This happened before. I happen to be just a student of history. I've loved Sierra Leone politics for a long time, so I read it. But it should be accessible to all. And if we have a social media banter conversation, we shall have a source that we go to that provides the objective, undisputable, historical, archival record. Because that is what we build nation states on. That's what you build a national memory on. That's what historians will use. That's what researchers today need to use, right? If you want to conduct research, you need to go to those archives. You read about them. In other countries, they spend so much on these kinds of things. I was just in Brussels not too long ago, and I'll tell you what, one of the things that blew my mind, every year, the ambassador took us to a place called Waterloo. We have Waterloo here, and apparently they always memorialize the Battle of Waterloo when, France was defeated by the Allied forces. They have the records there, they have a memory there, and then they bring people together every year and they reenact that. You would think, why is the state spending so much money on that? Why every year they spend a lot of money on that? Because if you don't have memory, you don't have a state. Because it's the thing that brings you together, that binds us, that gives us this sense of something, that makes us Sierra Leonean, that makes us proud of our country, want to fight for it, to understand that people fought for us to be here, and we're part of a continuum. Now, if you don't have records and archives, and I think Joseph Kaifala has been saying this for a long time, the Center for Memory, that we need to have memory. Of course, his work is focused mostly on the Civil War.
Sorry to interrupt you there. We're going on a quick break. Just a minor technical glitch would have to resolve quickly. Please stay with us. We would be right back. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for staying with us through that short break. This is Wake Up Sierra Leone here on AYV Television and Radio. Before we went on that break, you were making a submission, but perhaps I wouldn't let you land on that. I was going to take you to this takes us to a very expensive part of this policy, data storage. All over the world, countries who take data storage seriously, they spend a lot of money on data storage because unlike the physical copies, the hard copies, where you just find a space and put, on the cloud as well, you need that space, and it's quite a lot of money. What are the plans for the infrastructure and the resources to put it together?
So there are two things we should separate. On the infrastructure, that's for my colleague, the Excellence Minister of Communications, Technology and Innovation, and they've been working on this. For the first time now we have, I think, a very functional government email system, for example, that is, and they've built a government cloud that we own. For a long time, we are outsourcing this. As you know, with the tech and innovation infrastructure, again, President Bio has been building this as usual. It feels to be like he's building it from the roots and thinking through that. And on the question of data governance, storage, and the architecture of that, the Ministry of Commerce is doing that. What this is when data is now raw, is converted into public records and archives. And what do we do with that? So as we said, our job is to create the systems, the policies, the regulations for how you keep, record, what should you do? Where should you store it? How should you? That's our job. The infrastructure of where it is stored, that system has to be done by my colleague at the Ministry of Commerce, Technology and Innovation, and they're working with the STI and the rest of the institutions to think through, especially when it comes to the digital architecture.
the minister. You previously you talked about the new media and its efficacy. We are now talking about convergence. Putting everything in one. How does that help? New media in Sierra Leone. This new policy. In context, please.
I'm happy you asked this because I want to move to the National Media and Information Policy, which I think is also really critical. Right now, we are in a different age. This your show, you can put 2 episodes into an AI bot and tell the AI bots that today Minister Ba is coming. The AI bots can reproduce this show for you completely with your voices. Huh? It can even create an impression of you and make somebody believe that. Now, that's both an opportunity and a threat because it threatens the truth, it threatens reality, but it's an opportunity. It gives us new ways of creating contents that are vast, but it could be challenges as well. Information pollution, people can now create things and say, Siba said this, when in fact I didn't say it. By the way, there's one thing in this studio that I said before, chased me on social media. I did not say Burkina Faso is packaging. I said it is a package. It's funny, eh? One of the people who's been saying this publicly is a whole professor, and I've refused to challenge him online. I just beg him, go watch the tape of what I said. But that's an example. It's an aside. But we all now face different threats and risks. And in the past, we did not have the regulatory framework. What do we do? What do we do about artificial intelligence? What do we do about breaking news from citizens? News is no longer confined to you professionals. Yeah. News is now, you've got these bloggers, huh? They are potent, powerful. People follow them. They have followership. In fact, they dominate the agenda of the news. They can decide what we speak about tomorrow. But what's the framework for it? How do we take care of that? How do we intersperse that with, for example, issues of privacy, data protection, cybersecurity, and all of those things? Because those things are important too, even as we yearn for a free world. So what this policy does is create regulatory framework for the entirety of the media space. And what I love about it particularly is also, I believe it's very progressive and it's forward-looking. It's not just thinking about the problems we face today, but it seeks to anticipate the problems of the future, even as the media world changes. So it thinks about print media, it thinks about electronic media, it thinks about the new media, it thinks about news agencies, it thinks about everything we think about now. There's a whole section there dedicated to artificial intelligence and AI, and what do we do? How do we ensure there's ethical journalism, training of the media professionals? It also institutionalizes what President Bio has been doing, which is providing resources to sludge, to the media, and say every year we should provide some amount of government allocated resources, not because we want to muzzle the media as some people might suggest, but exactly because we believe the media is a critical arm of government. In political science, they refer to it as a fourth estate. You have the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature. The media is supposed to be the fourth. It means it's such a critical arm of a democracy that without it, you don't function. Now, if it's that important, you need to put some resources to it. That's what President Biya has been doing. The first president has done that, which is to say, let's institutionalize that this arm will survive, irrespective of the challenges that we face. How do we build on that? So I think the new media policy is a 360 policy. It looks at every single angle, and it also lays the foundation for us to think about new things that we have not anticipated now. So
and
we're not going to need a policy every 2 years.
In that 360, one of the challenges with the online platforms, the bloggers particularly, you have those who operate under aliases.
Correct.
Those who operate under a known name, those you can identify in the community, it's much easier to regulate them or call them out for trainings and so on. But those who operate under aliases, there are unknown names and phases to these pages. They wreak havoc and nobody gets to know who these people are. It makes it, we've seen instances online when people even say, I am going to sue this particular blogger or page to court. But how do you begin to seek legal redress when you don't have an identity of that particular blog? So with a policy like this, it still leads us to a situation of How does this policy really address some of these problems?
In fact, when this paper came up in cabinet, a lot of my colleagues were thinking exactly about this. Many people talked about, for example, lots of us as ministers, me, I have like 10 profiles on Facebook that are not mine. People create these profiles, they steal my pictures, they post, every time I post, they just take those pictures and they just put it there. They chat with people online, they ask them for money. One lady journalist came up to me and said, somebody's using your profile asking me for nudes, something that I will never do. You know, it's you know, my colleague told stories about what happened when somebody took them on a long ride and it almost felt like they were being taken away for a ritual, and then somebody posted that, minister, we don't call this Peking for ritual. And this minister is not even on social media. So this is just one manifestation of a set of problems that we have to deal with. There's also this thing of online news media, right? Like big media institutions registered to operate entirely online, operating with Sierra Leone news. So what do we do with that? The policy addresses that and provides guidance for IMC to look at and say, okay, hey, this is how we're going to require you to register if you operate online but are physically located in Sierra Leone, or your news links into Sierra Leone. The second opportunity we have with the media policy, because it provides predictability, is for us to engage the social media companies, because these people require, they need to work with these social media companies, right? They're not gonna, there's a way we can find you, right? If you say, oh, you are this, but you need to be invisible. Some bloggers are no names, right? You've got some bloggers, it's part of their mystique. We don't want to affect that, because that is part of the platforms.
Yeah,
but if you use it,
problem.
exactly, if you use it to commit a crime, to violate the laid down predictable standard international practices, then because we have a policy, we can engage Facebook, we can engage YouTube, we can share the details, and we have excellent relationship with these platforms now. And we cannot, again, they will not allow us to muzzle, but if you want to violate the policies of a country, then they will use that.
So who would benefit from this? Is it the government or the ordinary citizens?
Everybody.
I ask because perhaps it would be much easier if, you know, one of such people who operate on anonymity online do something against government or has a government interest. It would be faster and easier for the government to take action. But when it involves ordinary citizens who you would say perhaps are nobodies in society, but also have the right to their dignity and privacy. So
correct.
Who stands to benefit from it?
So the essence of this policy is to protect everybody, not just government. That's why we provide these guidelines. That's why as a citizen you will now have, because you have a policy for the first time, you will know what to do and where to go. You will see that, hey, this institution is responsible if it's a media blackmail. This is where you first lodge your complaint. Now there's a unit at the police if it's a cyber crime that you can go to, and the cybercrime unit can refer to both the policy and the laws that we have to start taking the steps that they need to take. But it's not just about government, as you say. Yes, government people too need to be protected, but it's about the ordinary citizens mostly, because the biggest thing we have are our reputations, right? People seek to damage our reputations using deep fakes and things like that, and they can be very potent online. So I think what this policy will help us to do, I didn't land on one other point. If somebody uses a mobile phone, now the person that tried to get somebody's nude, ask them to move to WhatsApp. I think as soon as you move to WhatsApp, you need a number. Now that number has to be registered. This is why, again, government's policy requiring everybody to have NIN.
Sadly, not all numbers are registered in Sierra Leone, and not everyone has a NIN.
But we're going to, on October 1, we'll turn off all numbers without. We've made this clear. We're going to turn off every single number that doesn't have that, so that you will link with that identity and we can find it. But even if you don't have NIN, the government does have the ability now, if you have a phone and you're using that phone, they can track you. They can find where you are, especially if you're committing crime. They just have to follow due process to be able to do that. So this policy, what it does is it makes even the law enforcement have a framework by which they can apply that. So we can guarantee press freedom, which is critical, but we can also guarantee individual privacy or reputation You know, we don't want to live in a country where somebody grab number and say it like amphibian and get away with that, or go online and begin to put this blackmail campaign against you. So we will be able to have the structure to systematically deal with these issues.
Would this be a kind of Pegasus in Sierra Leone?
What does that mean?
Pegasus is a software that the West use to monitor people's devices, you know, and all of these sensitive data.
No, I think it's the opposite of that.
Okay.
We're not the essence of both the media policy. Again, it's just a regulatory framework. It's not like a software that we don't track you and all. That is for Moktai people, cybersecurity people, NATSCA. Look, as a Sierra Leonean and now as a citizen of the world, you should know that as long as you're using your devices, somebody probably has a way of finding where you are, right? You use a cell tower. We've seen this now. So there's, when I'm speaking to my colleagues and they say, "Oh, Mr. Minister, if before you say something, somebody they record you," I said, my assumption is somebody is always recording. In my position that I am in, somebody has a device somewhere, and I conduct my life in a way that hopefully people will say, you know, I have nothing to. If I say it privately, I'm happy to say it publicly. That's how I operate. But beyond that, I think this is not about limiting individual freedom. Okay. It's about building on individual freedom. It's about making sure that we can guarantee that. But individual freedom, again, as I said, your reputation is part of your freedom. The press, the ability to operate, but knowing that there are laws and knowing what the laws are and that they are consistent with international standards. So when you don't have laws, what happens is you have arbitrariness. Somebody they grab numbers, I don't know rights, and you know, you do, and they say, but me not be no. Now may not be no good. We will publish this. We're finalizing designing of it. It will be published online. We'll embark on training and capacity building of not just the media sector. Again, as I said, they gave us this policy, but we're going to go back and do that. But also government officials, public officials, public information officials, PR officials, so they will understand what the policy is, because this policy regulates even PR officers, universities that are doing work on public information and things like that. It has something there for everybody. Same thing with records and archives. It needs to be rolled out in a very systematic way, reaching everybody in the country, so you understand, because it's an obligation. And for records, as I said, there's going to be a law as well that follows.
I don't think I'm not sure we had asked this. Does it have a local standard? Does it have a legal backing that compels someone to follow these rules?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Cabinet's conclusions are they have the force of, you know, the ability to force you to comply with them. And then there's another level that for laws now need to be taken to Parliament. So this is why for the records and archives we have a draft bill that we will work with the AG's office. We'll take that to Parliament, and hopefully before the end of this year that will be passed. We're also working on additional laws that I think also complements this, which is the data protection law. Everybody keeps asking about that. You know, in Sierra Leone now, somebody the gap number, you publish your name, your telephone number, who say you did. Even law enforcement, sometimes when they report on news, they report to the arrest so person, this person of so address. That is wrong. This is it violates international best practices, but we currently don't have the regime in Sierra Leone. We don't have the laws. But what the ministry is doing now is we're engaging. We have a partnership with UNDP, the EU, Irish Aid. We've hired the consultants. We have a draft of those policies, and for the first time again, inshallah, before the end of the year, we will have a comprehensive data protection regulation, data protection policy, and data protection laws.
Similarly, but perhaps independently, with the mainstream media, there are codes of ethics that, you know, professional journalists would have to go by. You can't say the same for the bloggers, which in itself is a problem. For example, you know, mainstream media, we understand that if you are at a crime scene or an accident scene, you are to blur you know, those graphic and gruesome images. You're not to show the face of the victim, and if you're dealing with minors, people who are not 18, you don't show their faces. Very recently, I saw a video of, you know, 3 allegedly underage girls who were camped with somebody. Bloggers went live we could see the faces of these kids revealing their identity. And according to the IMC law, you're not supposed to reveal their identities. You would say perhaps it's lack of knowledge, but what is the ministry doing to capacitate these bloggers to get them up to speed? Because their lack of knowledge and unprofessionalism, though they want to do the work of journalists, it's actually affecting other people in society.
I've been called the blogger minister, and I take it as a badge of honor. I think this is a product of progress, change. Every time a sector changes, you've got new entrants into the sector. There are new players. They come with their own ways of doing things. They challenge the status quo. They want to be quick because their platforms require NAMI for Stockholm. So they want to go out first. They have different levels of editorial standards. I'm sure when you produce something here, you have editors and a whole systems. They don't, because they operate on low budget. They utilize the public infrastructure that's there. But every progress in history, what we are guided by, is faced similar issues. You know, remember when the camera first came and photographers, you know, everybody, when the phone became a breaking news tool, everybody was worried that nobody will need a photographer anymore. But you still have photographers today who are professional photographers who do a very different job than what we do. I think it's the same thing I've been saying to Sludge. Think about the bloggers as they're here to push you. And yes, there will be the challenges that you talk about, privacy, standards. Sometimes there's a gross negligence and recklessness in the work. What this policy does is, first, we need to recognize them as media players. We can no longer think of them as these unprofessionals who are out there. They are structured. Some of them have...
Yeah, but the question is, how do we transition them? They do have their contributions, not just to the public, even to the media itself. So they could put things online. You, as a professional journalist, you see that as a tip or source. You follow through on that.
So we need to...
But the question is, how do they get the capacity building to know what to do, the basic codes of conduct?
So every time a journalist tells me that we need to build the capacity of the bloggers, I always say, be careful, because the bloggers are exactly anti-journalist. What I mean anti, not against, but they're different from journalists. Their own medium is intentional to be different from your medium. They don't want to be bound by your own ethics and by own systems particularly.
Should we accept that standard as a nation?
No, so we should work with them to establish their own standards that work within their own framework and build and bring them into this, and then set predictable rules for them that they will understand what the rules are, that we can work with them on, that we can derive those rules. And then we set, this is why I'm not against, people believe that I was against SAP. I think SAP is a brilliant initiative. It is one effort to mobilize them and bring them under an umbrella. The policy now requires the states to move towards saying, if you're a blogger who wants to be recognized, who will have certain benefits because you are producing media, this is how you register. Not with us, maybe with IMC, maybe as a subgroup of Sludge. Some bloggers will decide still to not register. I don't think that should be fundamentally a problem. But when you are out of that structure, you're not registered and something happens, then you will not be protected by the structure. They will treat you as you're somebody that wanted to be rogue in the first place. So we need to think about it in a creative way, and that's what this policy does. It doesn't set prescription that all bloggers now have to have a degree or a certificate. No, because the whole point of blogging is that anybody, me granny, can grab in the morning on their bed, he get phone, he say, I'm a blogger, he produce content online, he push people that they follow, they find it interesting. They follow public interest. They are like sniffing what the public is going to want. So we have to be creative of how we do that.
Conflicts with somebody's safety, security, or mental state. Take, for example, the video I spoke about that I saw on a blog site online, where those girls, they were doing live videos. On the comment section, it would shock you, some of the comments. Some people type in Pikin gyal them. The stigma,
of course,
it's already presenting.
Of course.
So
No,
everybody becomes a content creator until your content becomes a problem, or perhaps leads somebody to suicide. Then we understand it's a problem.
We hope we don't get to that. But look, we're not going to set rules that stop people from being rude. or stop people from saying stupid things on social media. No rules is going to stop that. What I'm saying is, we need to approach this situation as a challenge of like a brand new set of developments. And by the way, a crime is a crime. Publishing kids' faces in those cases is already listed as a crime in this country. And so law enforcement has the ability, for example, to be able to hold them accountable. What we need to do is to let, if you are blogging, know that you are still a citizen of Sierra Leone and you're still subjected by the laws. And once you violate those laws, the law should, without prejudice, hold you accountable. But we as a ministry want to work with you so you don't get to that stage in the first place. So we don't want to start the conversation by saying, oh, that's what I do, because what they do works for them. And we need to change it in a way that it doesn't violate other people's privacy, it doesn't violate laws, it doesn't endanger children, and doesn't lead anybody to committing suicide, as you said.
It appears as though we're having a conflict with public interest and interest of the public. Yeah, this morning.
It's an interesting challenge, but I think it's one that the policy manages very well. And I think that approach, as I've said, it's actually at the heart of how President Bill thinks as well, is to not think of these new worlds as like our problems that we are going to approach. They are opportunities too. They are signs of progress. They are signs of the change in times, and we must embrace that and now recalibrate.
Lastly, Mr. Minister, I know Chief Minister has been working on this. Is it feasible at the moment? Monetization.
I know I've been hearing about monetization for a long time. So at the Tech and Innovation Summit, I was on a panel with the folks from TikTok. I'm in touch with them actually right now as well, with my colleague Salim Abba, who is again working on this with the Chief Minister. A lot of conversations are ongoing. Monetization requires a certain level of infrastructure that we're working on. So copyrights, cyber security, but also data protection. It's critical. EU ECOWAS says for you to be able to do that, you know, the payment switch that we have now in Sierra Leone is helping us to do that. The next phase of the payment switch is going to be also how we do international payment. So are we working towards that? You bet. Are there opportunities right now for monetization? Some people can monetize aspect of their social media accounts right now, actually, as we stand in Sierra Leone, because people can donate to you directly. That's monetization. If they like your content, you can create subscription-only platforms that people can send you resources that you can receive those resources. So we're beginning, but to get to the level that we need to get to, we need to continue to fill in these structural issues. And what I love about what Minister Salim Abba is doing with the support of the Chief Minister is they're thinking about it systematically, not just to, low gain publicity today, but how do we do that so it's long term, it's sustainable, and it provides real jobs for young people in our country.
All right, we'll come right back to you in a moment.
I think there are a few messages on the Facebook page at the moment.
You would nicely read them.
There are a few of them actually. John is saying there will be a risk of unauthorized access or misuse by government officials or corrupt police personnel, example, leaking or selling information. Citizen data like phone records or surveillance footage can be used for political oppression or targeting opponents. Sia Kuma is saying, Mr. Minister, I beg to defer your comment on Burkina Faso. I'm not sure I'm going to read it. Suleiman Kamal is saying, exactly, Mr. Minister Chegnoba is saying always, let me force post-term. So, Minister, the government is working towards controlling the narrative. Simple. And so the person is saying, could this database information be operated manually or also internet-based access for public information? This is a laudable venture and a long overdue policy that is needed in our country. As the saying goes, information is knowledge and knowledge is power. But I have some questions, Mr. Minister. Who is going to control the recording, storing, and accessibility of all of this information? And please, it should not be controlled by the executive arm of the government, but rather Parliament and the citizens, who determines what is to be archived and how it is to be archived. Who controls accessibility to this information? These are just a few of the messages, Mr. Minister.
Great, I need to answer them because it's Monday. I have to go to my management meeting, but thank you for having me. So quickly, in terms of, as I said, what we will do is to create the guideline for you to record that information when it's required. Parliaments, as I said, we're also going to go to Parliament. Parliament will have a hand in this. Even parliamentary record has to be kept. So Parliament too is bound by the same laws. right? Judicial records have to be kept over time, and they have to be structured in a very intentional way. So I think I'll encourage citizens to just wait. In the next couple of weeks, we'll publish the full policy online. We've done extensive consultation. The point of this, again, is not government to control you, but it's for us to do the right thing to advance our democracy and our rule of law in this country.
Thank you very much, Chairman Oba, Minister of Information and Civic Education, for your time being a part of Wake Up Sierra Leone today. At this point, would like to say thanks to our guests for being a part of the program. Thanks to you, our lovely audience, for tuning into the program.